Hi, welcome to Hack of All Trades. My name's John, and today I'm going to share with you a build that I completed recently, which was to build a custom subwoofer enclosure for my car. I have a BMW 5 Series from way back in 1999, which I absolutely love, and I recently installed an Android head unit into the car to bring the functionality up into the modern era, and it's really fantastic. It also sounds really good, but one thing that I noticed after installing it was that I just wanted more bass. The car comes fitted with a subwoofer from the factory, and it's made by Nokia, and it does produce nice, clean, sharp bass. There's just not enough of it, and I wanted something with a bit more thump to it. So I decided to get rid of that and design and build my own. So I got onto eBay and I found a Sony 600 watt amplifier and a Pioneer 12-inch shallow mount subwoofer. And so I set about designing an enclosure to suit that subwoofer. In this picture, up on the top of the boot, there's a grey trim piece, and it covers the Nokia subwoofer. And in this picture, you can see the subwoofer with the trim piece removed. The subwoofer that comes as standard has just two 4-inch drivers configured into a 4th order bandpass configuration. It produces nice clean bass. Look, it sounds great. It's just not loud enough. So that's what I was attempting to fix here. The great thing about this existing setup is that it uses virtually no usable boot space, and that makes it a great option for most people. Here's another picture of the Nokia sub out of the car. So I jumped onto FreeCAD and had a go at designing my own enclosure. My primary constraint was that I wanted to use up as minimal boot space as I possibly could. I do use the boot in the car, and I really didn't want to compromise that too much. So, and that's specifically why I went and bought a shallow mount subwoofer in aid of meeting that constraint. This is the design of the front panel that I came up with. You can see the cutout in the middle for the subwoofer itself and the grille that goes around it. And then I was planning on putting two acrylic pieces into the cutouts in the side, which I would surround with LED lights to just give it a nice feature. I built most of the enclosure out of 16mm MDF, which is just what I had lying around in the shed. For the subwoofer mount, I actually used 41mm chipboard, which was part of a kitchen cabinet build, I think. This is all scraps that I had lying around in the shed, and I cut this out in about an hour. Having a good design on FreeCAD really helped because I knew exactly what I needed to cut. So in this picture you can just see it sitting on my workbench. It's just sitting together here. There's no nails or screws or glue or anything at this point. I just wanted to test that I'd done all the cuts right and everything was going to fit perfectly. And once it had, I got stuck into putting it together. I cut out a hole in the front panel to mount the subwoofer. And in this picture you can see when it was all actually put together. So it came together quite easily, quite neatly. So the next step was to do a test fit in the car. There's no boot trim in at this point, so the subwoofer doesn't quite sit up against the roof of the boot, but it fits in there nicely, and the slope on the back of the enclosure butts up nice and tight against the firewall at the back of the boot. So the way that I actually mounted the subwoofer was that I took out the back seat and I drilled 4 holes through the firewall and into the back of the subwoofer enclosure, and then I took out the subwoofer enclosure and put threaded inserts into those holes. And so now I just use 4 big bolts that go through the firewall and into the back of the subwoofer, and that holds it in nice and tight up against the firewall. No rattles, no squeaks, no nothing. It's solid and it's not going anywhere. So in this picture you can see I had started cutting out the front panel. While the enclosure itself was really easy to build, it only took me an hour or two to do, the front panel that goes on the front of the enclosure was a whole different story. It was very complex cuts that all had to be done in a specific order, otherwise it wasn't going to work. And the cuts were sort of in 3 dimensions, so I had to be really careful about what I was doing. But it ended up working out really well. So this is when I just cut out the hole for the subwoofer and the grill, and I just wanted to make sure that it was going to fit in there without any problems. As you can see now that there's the trim in the bottom of the boot, that the subwoofer actually sits up nice and snug up against the roof, so it's a really nice tight fit in there. So the next step was to build a template for cutting out the holes in the sides where the acrylic sheets would go. So here I just cut out a rough template using the jigsaw, and I drilled 4 holes for the 4 corners to get a radius on each of the corners. They were done precisely in a jig, but the rest of it I just cut out roughly with the jigsaw. And then what I did was that I used some double-sided tape to tape some straight edges around the straight parts of the template, and then I just used the router to go around the template using the straight edges as a guide, and that enabled me to produce a nice clean template that I could then use for both sides and know that they were going to be exactly the same. So in these next 2 pictures you can see after I'd actually done the cutouts, coming together really nicely at this point. I still haven't cut any of the rebates out of the back of it, and there's still a fair bit of finishing that still needs to be done. But so far it's coming along really nicely. And this is when I put the front panel onto the front of the subwoofer for a test fit after I'd done the cutouts. The front panel is attached to the subwoofer enclosure itself via 10 neodymium magnets. I've got 10 magnets in the front panel, 10 magnets in the enclosure, and they pull each other together nice and close, and that works really well. No rattles, no nothing. It just it holds on tight. So that worked out really well. I was really happy with that. So this picture is taken after I'd finished cutting out all of the rebates into the back of the front panel, and I've installed the LED lights around the edges of the cutouts. And here is a close-up of that. You can see the LEDs are inset about 15 millimeters from the edge. That was to make sure that you couldn't see any individual LEDs from the front. I just wanted to be able to see the glow coming from the acrylic sheets that I would install in there. So I built another template to cut out the acrylic sheets, and they just slotted in nice and tightly up against those LEDs. And in this picture you can see what it looked like after I first installed them. What I did was that with the acrylic sheets I sanded the front and the back using 320 grit sandpaper, just to get that nice frosted look to the front and back. And around the edges I finished them up I got them nice and straight with the router, and then I went over it with, first of all, 120 grit, then 320 grit, and then 600 grit, and then 1000 grit, and then I used the Dremel to polish the edges up until they came up pretty much like glass. You could see right through the acrylic sheets looking side on. Which was exactly what I wanted. I really wanted the LEDs to be able to shine bright through there. And this is after I'd installed the acrylic sheets into the cutouts. They fit nice and snug there up against the LEDs, and they just provide a nice uniform glow. Yeah, whenever I try to take a picture of this, the colour doesn't look that uniform. And that's an artifact of the camera not having the dynamic range to take a picture of something like this. When you look at it in real life, it just looks beautiful and uniform. The camera always makes it look a bit like there's variation in the colour. So in this next picture, this is when the whole shebang is installed into the car. You can see up the top of the, in the roof of the boot is where I'd installed the 600 watt amplifier that I've got with the subwoofer. And the subwoofer here is mounted up tight against the rear of the boot with most of the trim in. And in this next picture, it's after I've got all of the trim in place. So after I'd done that, what I did was I installed more LED lights in the roof of the boot, and I used 2 Bluetooth controllers, one for the subwoofer enclosure and one for the LEDs in the roof of the boot. And so I can independently control the colour and the brightness of each of them. And it all comes on automatically when you open the boot. So I think it looks really good, and as you can see, I've still got plenty of boot space left. At the bottom, the subwoofer enclosure is just over 250 millimeters deep, and at the top it's only about 100 millimeters deep. So it really didn't take up that much boot space, and I think it looks fantastic. I'm really pleased with it. So that's all the photos that I've got of the build. I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly enjoyed building it, and I really am happy with the end result. I'll leave you with a couple of clips that I took just on my phone, playing a few YouTube-friendly music samples with a bit of bass, bearing in mind that what I can take on my phone is not going to be a true representation of the bass that you hear and, more importantly, feel in real life. But it is what it is, and I hope you enjoy these clips. Thanks for joining me. Bye for now.